Welcome to our 2028 presidential election coverage. We will be covering the preliminary polls for the both Democratic and Republican primaries this evening, and eventually the primaries themselves, the first elections, essentially mini elections of this entire presidential election campaign season. So let's get started. If this is the first time you're seeing one of my videos, make sure to check out the full playlist linked up above now. That is my 2024 series, of which this is a continuation of. Now on to the election night. Here is the initial polling for the Democratic primary. Incumbent President Jon Ossoff, who won election in 2024, is currently at 50%. His main challenger, Eric Adams, is at 25%, meaning that while Jon Ossoff has essentially double the amount that Adams has and a lead of 25% over him, he's in a weaker position as an incumbent. He should be doing better. Meanwhile, 15% behind Adams is AOC, the main progressive in this race, and 15% is undecided. In Iowa, it is a 15% lead for Jon Ossoff over Eric Adams. Meanwhile, Adams has a 10% lead over AOC, 30% to 20%, and 5%. A very small number, but it makes sense since Iowa is a very visited state in the primaries, currently at 5% undecided. And for New Hampshire, a far closer race, 40% for Ossoff. That means he has an 8% lead over Eric Adams, 40% to 32%. Adams in turn has an 11% lead over AOC, 32% to 21%, 7% is undecided. And in the Nevada primary, 35% for Ossoff is the most competitive race so far. 35% for Ossoff, 30% for both AOC and Eric Adams, and 5% undecided. Ossoff is definitely in a pretty weak position here as the incumbent, he should be doing better. And in South Carolina, the exact same numbers, many minorities going to Adams and progressives to AOC. And for the Republican primary, it is a 20% lead for current frontrunner Jon DeSantis, 35% for him, 15% for Nikki Haley, 15% for Kimberly Yee, governor of Arizona, and 11% for Jon James. That means that Kimberly Yee could definitely take second place when Nikki Haley is currently considered to be next in line to Ron DeSantis. And in the extended list, we have Governor Kristi Noem at 9%, Rand Paul and Ted Cruz at 5%, and Mike Lindell at 1%. And for Iowa, it is a 10% lead for Ron DeSantis, 30% to 20%. His next main challenger is Nikki Haley, and she's actually tied with Jon James. Meanwhile, Kimberly Yee is at 15%. And it is actually pretty close to New Hampshire, a 4% lead for Ron DeSantis, smaller than his Iowa lead. 29% for him, 25% for Nikki Haley, and Jon James and Kimberly Yee are tied at 20%. For Nevada, an exact tie between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, and at 5% behind them is Kimberly Yee. And in South Carolina, this is Nikki Haley's home state, hence her strong 30% margin so far in the polling. And we were poll closing out of the Iowa caucus, the first race essentially of the primary season, where many candidates have been visiting for about a year. So let's see who will win, and we have a major projection to make. Jon Ossoff will easily carry the Iowa Democratic caucus, but by a much, much larger margin than previously expected. He will win 70% of the vote in 29 delegates, a massive win when even in the polling he was expected to get around 45%. This is what he needed to win in order to assert his dominance over AOC and Eric Adams and cement himself as potentially the next nominee. Jon Ossoff was in a weaker position going into this primary than he should have been as a sitting president. Yet this is a margin that he will be getting anyway, even if his approval rating wasn't very low. So 29 delegates for Ossoff, 7 delegates and 17% of the vote for Eric Adams, 5 delegates and 12% of the vote for AOC. And we can now project that Ron DeSantis will be the winner of the Iowa Republican caucus. A big win tonight for the GOP frontrunner, cementing his place with that title. Here is the full county results. Ron DeSantis doing very well in many of the rural areas, being competitive in suburban and moderate areas. As you can see, Nikki Haley did pretty well in the Des Moines areas, urban and suburban Republicans. Meanwhile, Kimberly Yee took some more of those moderate places, but that are more conservative than mainly urban areas, and Jon James did well in the very more southern and eastern part of the state, southeastern part. And here is the full list. 15 delegates for Ron DeSantis, 8 delegates for Nikki Haley, 5 delegates for both Jon James and Kimberly Yee. Meanwhile, Kristi Noem took 3% and 7% and 3 delegates, 2 delegates for Rand Paul, and 1 delegate for both Mike Lindell and Ted Cruz. Here is the current primary map: 29 delegates for Jon Ossoff and 7 for Eric Adams. And here's a primary map for the Republicans: far more crowded primary, 15 delegates for Ron DeSantis, 8 for Nikki Haley. And Ted Cruz has announced that he is suspending his 2028 presidential bid after a poor Iowa performance. Mike Lindell is ending his 2028 campaign after he gained little traction in Iowa and across the nation. Kristi Noem is leaving the 2028 presidential race after she failed to find support across the country. And Rand Paul is dropping out after a poor Iowa caucus showing. And here is the polling for the New Hampshire primary: 45% for Ossoff, a 20% lead over Eric Adams, 25% of the vote. Meanwhile, AOC is at 20% and 10% is undecided. Definitely a better margin for Jon Ossoff. You saw him with about an 8% lead before. He now has a 20% lead, making him a strong favorite to win this primary. In the Republican primary, also a bigger lead for the GOP frontrunner Ron DeSantis, 10% instead of 4%. He's at 35% now, instead of around 29% before the Iowa caucuses. And we have our poll closing out of New Hampshire. Let's see who will win and with major projection to make. The New Hampshire primary will go to Jon Ossoff. He will sweep this in a landslide with 68% of the vote and 11 delegates. He will stomp Eric Adams 18%, a 50% lead over his main challenger. Definitely what Ossoff needed tonight. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis will win the New Hampshire primary, doing very well in the vote here. 40%, as you can see, doing very well in the rural areas and in the more moderate areas. He will also win 15 delegates compared to Nikki Haley's 5 delegates, and this is definitely a big win for Ron DeSantis tonight. Here's current primary map. Jon Ossoff has expanded his lead over Eric Adams to 30 delegates. Definitely a big win in New Hampshire, what he needed to really revitalize his campaign and cement his place as the frontrunner. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis now has a 12-delegate lead over Nikki Haley, going to double digits here. And AOC says that she will drop out if she loses the Nevada primary. Let's check out the polling for this race. Currently, Jon Ossoff is at 50% compared to AOC's 30%, meaning that AOC's pledge may come true as she's not doing very well. But do remember that many of the polling initially underestimated Jon Ossoff, so that means that he could win by an even larger margin than expected in this polling. And in the Nevada primary for the Republicans, it is a 10% lead for Ron DeSantis. You saw his primary being very competitive, but Ron DeSantis has upped his margin by about 10%, 30% to 40%. And we have the Nevada primary poll closings. Let's see who will win with major projection to make. Nevada will give its delegates, or the majority, or if not plurality, to Jon Ossoff, and we actually now have the delegate numbers to check them out. We said plurality potentially, but it actually is a strong 72% majority for Jon Ossoff, sweeping the field with an even larger margin than in New Hampshire. Currently, Eric Adams at 13% of 5 delegates, same for AOC. And Ron DeSantis will win the Nevada Republican primary, no surprise here, but a big win nonetheless. As you can see, he took 44% of the vote compared to Nikki Haley's 24%. Haley only won a single county, Washoe County, very moderate county. That makes sense, that is pretty much Haley's base. Ron DeSantis swept every other county in the state, however. And here are the extended results. 11 delegates for DeSantis, 6 for Haley, 5 for Yee, and 3 for John James. And here's a primary map for the Democrats, a 50 delegate lead over Jon Ossoff. I can do math. He has a 66 delegates compared to Eric Adams' 15 delegates. This is another big lead for Ossoff after he swept the Nevada primary. It looks like Ossoff is on track to be renominated. And here is the Republican primary map. We can see that Ron DeSantis has 39 delegates and Nikki Haley's 22. He has expanded his margin slightly. And AOC is leaving the 2028 presidential campaign after she did not get as much support as she hoped. AOC was running to win, and eventually she did not win a single primary. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is leaving the 2028 presidential campaign. And John James is suspending his 2028 presidential campaign. He failed to gain as much traction to become the nominee, so he is leaving the race. And Kimberly Yee also exiting the presidential race. She had a very strong performance, no doubt about that, but she failed to gain enough support to even win a single primary and stood in the shadow of Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley the entire campaign season. And Eric Adams has made a pledge similar to AOC's that he will drop out if he loses South Carolina. But with Jon Ossoff's strong support in the state, he did win it back in 2024. That means that Adams is definitely at a disadvantage. If you look at the polling, and remember the polling did underestimate Jon Ossoff several times, 70% for Ossoff, meaning that if it doesn't underestimate him by the same margins, Ossoff could be winning up to 80% of the vote. Meanwhile, Eric Adams only has 25%. Many of AOC's more progressive voters are going for Jon Ossoff, however. And for the Republican primary, it is an exact tie. This is Nikki Haley's home state. She won it back in 2024, and that was actually a stepping stone to her becoming the GOP nominee. Her campaign was down, and the win in South Carolina revitalized her strength and allowed her to sweep Super Tuesday. And we have our South Carolina poll closings. Let's see who wins and a major projection to make. Jon Ossoff will sweep the Democratic primary in South Carolina. He will easily win this state. As you can see, he will win 85% of the vote and 46 delegates. Eric Adams definitely underestimated his support with many minorities and with moderate white voters. Jon Ossoff's coalition here is very similar to the one he had back in 2024, which allowed him to beat out Kamala Harris, and essentially this was also his pathway to the nomination back in 2024. Eric Adams, a very poor performance here, only 14% of the vote and 8 delegates. And Nikki Haley will win the South Carolina Republican primary. This is not as much of a surprise, but Haley was the underdog. Let's check out the statewide results. An 8% win for Nikki Haley, 59,000 votes separate the two candidates. Haley winning many of the urban and suburban areas, while Ron DeSantis showing very good strength in the rural parts of the state. As you can see, Nikki Haley will win 27 delegates to Ron DeSantis' 23. And here is a primary map. Jon Ossoff has surpassed 100 delegates, and Eric Adams hasn't even passed 30. It is quite clear now that Eric Adams has no pathway to the nomination, and he will likely drop out soon. But until then, let's check out the Republican map. 76 delegates for Ron DeSantis, a 15-delegate lead over Nikki Haley's 61. And the much-awaited announcement, Eric Adams is leaving the 2028 presidential race. He says he will endorse Jon Ossoff and campaign for him. How much he will is under debate, as he was going pretty hard against him during the primary season. But no surprise here, Eric Adams did not gain enough traction to win the nomination, so he is going to leave the race. And we have a major projection to make. Jon Ossoff is the projected nominee for the Democratic primary. He will likely be renominated as president for the Democrats and go up against the Republican nominee in November. Meanwhile, for the Republican primary, it's a 10% lead in nationwide polling for Ron DeSantis, 55% to 45%. And your poll closings out of Super Tuesday. A massive amount of states will have their delegates up for grabs this evening. California, Texas, Virginia, Minnesota, very large states, and these could definitely decide who the nominee will be. And the Alabama primary will go to Ron DeSantis. Arkansas will go to Ron DeSantis, another state into the DeSantis column this evening. And in California, here are the statewide results. Ron DeSantis will win by nearly 6 points and 100,000 votes over Nikki Haley. In Colorado, Ron DeSantis will take the state. And Nikki Haley will take the state of Maine and Massachusetts. Both will go to Nikki Haley. Minnesota will go to Ron DeSantis. Big win for him tonight. And North Carolina will narrowly go to Nikki Haley. About a 1.4% difference in 38,000 votes. Oklahoma will go to Ron DeSantis. And Tennessee will fall into the DeSantis column this evening. And Texas will also go to Ron DeSantis, one of the biggest states up tonight. Massive win here. As you can see, Ron DeSantis has swept the state, winning a large amount of Texas counties. Nikki Haley only won a few more urban and suburban areas, but Ron DeSantis did very well in all of the rural areas in the Rio Grande Valley and in certain suburban areas. Utah will go to Nikki Haley, one of the few wins for her this evening. And Vermont will go to Ron DeSantis. And Virginia, another large win for the DeSantis campaign. Here's current primary map: 495 for Ron DeSantis, 433 for Nikki Haley. Ron DeSantis swept states like Texas, California, and Minnesota. Nikki Haley failed to win any large states besides North Carolina and Massachusetts, and both those were very narrow. And we were poll closings out of Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, and Washington. Several big states up here tonight that can make or break any campaigns. Nikki Haley needs to do very well here this evening. In the Idaho primary, we'll go to Ron DeSantis. Michigan will also fall into the DeSantis column this evening, a decent win for him by about 9%. Meanwhile, Ann Arbor and Detroit did have write-ins for John James, which allowed him to win those counties, but since he endorsed Ron DeSantis, those delegates will go to him. The Mississippi primary will go to Ron DeSantis. Same thing with the Missouri primary, which he will sweep with an 11% lead over Haley. And Washington will be the final state to fall into the DeSantis column this evening. Here is a current primary map. Ron DeSantis, 629 delegates, and Nikki Haley's 541. And here's the polling. Ron DeSantis has expanded his lead to 14% over Nikki Haley. And we're poll closings out of Arizona, Florida, and Illinois, some of the biggest states up tonight. Nikki Haley needs to win at least 2 of these states to be back into the campaign. She did win Arizona and Illinois back in 2024, but she will have to win them again and bolster her support in these states this evening. And we can project the Arizona primary will go to Ron DeSantis. He will win it by a narrow margin, about 33,000 votes, but he will win it nonetheless. These are 57 delegates up this evening, a big win for DeSantis. He will also carry the Florida primary in a landslide. This is his home state where he's very popular. No surprise here, but DeSantis is the projected winner. And he will also carry Illinois, cementing his lead this evening, sweeping all 3 states up for grabs in a massive amount of delegates. Here is the current county map. He swept the rural areas and Cook County, home of Chicago, many urban Republicans. Nikki Haley may have won a lot of counties, but was not enough for her to win. She lost by about 13.5%. And here is the current primary map. Ron DeSantis has a 100 delegate lead over Nikki Haley, and many of our initial polls show that he is leading in almost every single primary state up for grabs, meaning that we will definitely have a major announcement soon from Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley announced that she is suspending her 2028 presidential campaign. She did not gain nearly enough traction as her last race in 2024 in order to become the nominee. Soon we will show the comparisons from the 2024 map to the 2028 map, but stay tuned because we have a major projection to make. Ron DeSantis will be the nominee for the Republican primary. We can now project this as Nikki Haley, his only main challenger left, has dropped out. A big win for DeSantis this evening. About 4 years in the making since he announced back in 2024, he suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of Nikki Haley, who went on to lose the primary campaign. Since then, he has been building up his national support, and it finally paid off in the form of the nomination for the Republican Party. Here is the primary map currently. As you can see, we will go back to this soon, but this is what we really want you to see. The 2024 primary map. As you can see, Nikki Haley won California, Washington, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, Mississippi, Missouri, Illinois, and Virginia. She lost all of these states in 2028. Texas, California, Washington, massive states that could have given her the nomination, but she lost them to Ron DeSantis. And here's the primary map again. So now you'll have the opportunity to choose the VP for Ron DeSantis. This is a continuation, almost a tradition from our last 2024 series, and you can choose who Ron DeSantis' VP will be. In a pinned comment, there will be the Google form. If it's not there, check out the description where it will be as well. So thank you all for watching. It really means a lot to me. If you want to support the channel, you can hit the like button and subscribe to post notifications. That, again, really helps out the channel. On the left, you can see a video custom tailored to your interest selected by YouTube. But before you do that, make sure that you have subscribed, which you can see on the right. Leave a comment telling me what you thought of the video, and check out the description for any useful links. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.